of the Master of Laws in International Legal Studies. I am extremely happy today because this postgraduate program constitutes a significant element of our international vision. Law is no longer a purely domestic issue, but a more and more international phenomenon. That's why Deusto Law School has always focused on the international dimensions of law, particularly on international law and European Union law. The international approach of the law has been embedded in Deusto for decades and has produced good examples such as the foundation of the first Institute of European Studies in Spain in 1979, even before Spain became a member of the European Union. Deusto was one of the first universities in which European law was taught. And being a pioneer in this field has allowed Deusto Law School to receive a number of distinctions from the European Commission, with several Jean Monnet actions designed to promote excellence in teaching and research in the field of European Union studies worldwide. All European law professors and holders of Jean Monnet chairs are part of this Master in International Legal Studies, and you will have the opportunity to meet them during the academic program. I take the opportunity today to warmly thank all of them on behalf of this law school. Without their commitment, research, and teaching, this program would not be a reality. I also would like to express my gratitude to all who have contributed to build up this academic program. This LLM is a dream that has come true after many years of work and dedication. It's an expression of a joint effort by many instances of our law school. In that sense, I'm very grateful to those academics that have been involved from the outset. Joana Brisqueta, Luis Gordillo, Marta Enciso, Laura Gómez, Emilio Armaza. I'm also very grateful to the people working at the Secretariat of our school. Irache San Miguel, Irache Erdozain, Erika Pradas, Julieta, and also our manager, Eugenio Villuela. But the special thanks go to Professor Felipe Gómez, Vice Dean for International Relations in our law school, also National Director of European Master in Human Rights and Democratization, and Vice President of the Global Campus of Human Rights. A whole career devoted to human rights, who has made possible this program, along with Professor Emilio Armaza, following the prestigious Ramón y Cajal career as researcher. The idea to create a postgraduate entirely in English with different paths of international learning. Thank you all very much, Emilio and Felipe. And now I give the floor to Professor Alex Rayon, Vice Rector for International Relations and Digital Transformation. Professor Alex Rayon, as Vice Rector for International Relations, also supported this project from the very beginning, and he has been instrumental for it. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you, dear Dean, and first of all, good morning to all of you. Welcome to the University of Deusto. If this is the first time that you are here, welcome to our campus in Bilbao. You know that we are a comprehensive university, having two campuses, Bilbao and San Sebastian, but you are here today in Bilbao. So first, secondly, welcome also to the city of Bilbao, if it is the first time that you are here. And thank you, dear Dean, for supporting and for pushing ahead this amazing project. And thank you also to all our colleagues that have been made this a real project. It's a real honor for me to be here with our former rector, Jaime, and thank you also to him because I know that he pushed it also, all this international dimension during the years that he was our rector. So thank you also to you. And thank you to all our students here today because obviously this wouldn't be our first group of this LLM if it weren't for your decisions. So it's a real thank you, a honest thank you to all of you. I still remember 3 years ago when I became the Vice Rector for International Relations, one of my first meeting was with Gemma speaking about this project, and with Felipe, the Vice Dean for International Relations. And, you know, for someone that is out of the law area, speaking about this LLM was something quite new, but something quite promising. So after 2 or 3 years of hard work, it's something quite nice to see that happened. So very, very glad to see that all our hard work has provoked this first welcoming day. Apart from that, I would also like to speak about the international dimension of this master and also the international dimension of the University of Deusto. You know that we started up our university back in the end of the 19th century, having law at our heart. So this new master is something that has been with us for many decades. Indeed, there are many speeches from the Jesuits back in the late 19th century speaking about the international dimension of law that was going to be quite important for the world in general, prior indeed to the First World War that opened the markets for many things, and also obviously prior to the Second World War that came to this new world, this new era, where the economical and multilaterality of the world is obviously reality. So that's something that is going to be in the heart of this master. And obviously the human rights, that is the second main block of this master, is something quite relevant in these days. Apart from that, I am quite happy to be also part of the faculty of this master. I will be with you in February, I think, with the data and new technologies module. I am a computer scientist, so quite far from what law has been, at least when I studied, but quite close these days, when we know that new technologies is also quite a challenging issue, speaking about human rights. So it's also quite interesting for me to have the chance, and thank you, Felipe and Gemma, for inviting me to be with you also in this master. So thank you again, and I wouldn't like to finish up without saying thank you also to my colleagues at the International Relations Office. Here is Judith Cano with us, because those are the people that really support also these projects. So it will be our pleasure to help you out with any issue that you may need during this year. And as we say here in the Basque Country, eskerrik asko, ongi etorri, y que disfrutéis de este año. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your words and your support all this time. And now I have the honor to introduce Professor Jaime Oraá. Jaime Oraá has devoted his academic career to international law. He first studied theology at the Gregoriana in Rome and Deusto. And as part of his Jesuit training, then he studied law at Deusto. And after that, he completed a doctorate in international law at the University of Oxford, under the direction of one of the best specialists in international law, Professor Brownlee. Later on, he completed his studies in The Hague, at the Academy of International Law, and in Strasbourg, René Cassin Institute of Human Rights. He joined this University of Deusto in 1991 as Professor of International Law and Human Rights. And 2 years later, he founded the Institute of Human Rights Pedro Arrupe, of which he was the first director, assuming as well the direction of the prestigious also European Master of Humanitarian Aid and the European Master in Human Rights and Democratization. He has been Dean of the Law Faculty, Rector of this university, and in the last years, he has been the President of UNIGES, the Federation of the University Centers of the Jesuits in Spain. But on top of that, Jaime Oraá is a maestro. He has played a highly relevant role in driving forward the internationalization of the legal studies, guiding so many law professors who are now in the best position to lead this program. Thank you very much for all you have been in this university and in this law school. Thank you very much. Given that this year, 2020, we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Organization, a good time for starting this program. We have among us Professor Miquel Mancisidor here. He's also professor of this program and he's member of the United Nations Organization, one of the committees of economic and social rights. Thank you very much also, Miquel, for being here and for being part of this program. Thank you very much. And as I say, given that this year we celebrate this important moment, Professor Jaime Oraá will speak now about the achievements and challenges of this important event. If you like.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for your kind words. I'm not even recognizing many of those very kind words that you said, as you will see soon in my intervention this morning here. So thank you very much for inviting me to inaugurate this LLM, International Legal Studies, which is a great joy and pleasure to do that. I'm not going to do more introduction because we have very short time and we have to deal with a huge topic in 30 minutes, as Felipe told me, which is an impossible task, you know, to talk about the history of the United Nations and its achievements and challenges in 30 minutes. It's impossible, but just I'm going to say some few reflection. In fact, next week we will remember the 75th anniversary of the entered into force of the United Nations Charter, next Friday. The Charter, as you know very well, was signed in San Francisco the 26th of June at the end of the United Nations Conference on International Organizations. It was an historical moment in the long way of the international community. For the first time, we have today an international organization which includes practically all member states, 193, representing all continents, all cultures, all nations, and all peoples. Today, all of them are seated in the General Assembly, with the right to discuss and debate about all the huge problems that the world have ahead. We know very well that the General Assembly has just the power to discuss, to debate, and finally to approve recommendations and not binding resolutions. But even though we should realize that for the first time in the history of humankind, we have an international organization including practically all nations of the world entitled to deal with all international problems, political problems, economic problems, social problems, cultural problems, and so forth. In this short time that we have today, I would like to emphasize just a few elements about three aspects of the United Nations. First of all, the history of the United Nations, its purposes and principles embodied in the Charter of the United Nations. Second, some of its main achievements during these 75 years and its failures. And finally, some of the huge challenges for the future. Well, I started with some brief reflections about the creation of the United Nations in 1945, after the Second World War. It's very important, as you know, many of you are lawyers, and you know that to read the text, the original text, is a very important thing to do, and go once again to the text and to read it and to study and to, because especially in the preamble and in the first articles, we have the purposes and main principles of the organization that we have also today as the main international organization in the world. So in the preamble of the Charter, it says that we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. So first of all, the first thing is, and the first aim of the organization is to save the successive generations from the war. The war that people there in 1945 in San Francisco experienced two terrible world wars. The first, in which almost 10 million people died, and the Second World War, in which about 70 million people died and destroyed all Europe and many parts of the world. So the first aim is to save successive generation from the scourge of war. Second, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations, large and small. That's extremely important. For the first time in an international treaty, we have the principle of respect and observance of fundamental human rights. Human beings before 1945, before the United Nations Charter, human beings were object of international law, not subjects. And now, for the first time in an international treaty, we have this reaffirmation, this in the faith of the fundamental human rights. So the human beings is extremely important also for humanity and also for the states gathered in San Francisco in 1945. The huge violations of human rights during the Second World War, with the Holocaust and with genocides and so many violations, so provoke in the nations gathered there this important commitment to reaffirm faith and fundamental human rights. And perhaps one of the main achievements, as we will say later on, of the United Nations history is precisely the creation of so many instruments, treaties, declarations on the international human rights law, more than 150 universal and regional treaties and declarations. Third element in the preamble, so we the peoples of the United Nations determined to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. So the importance of the rule of law, respect of international law, is one of the main conditions, and to get to justice, to international justice. Nowadays, we know many leaders of the world and most of the main countries and the superpowers, we have no respect at all for the rule of law and for international law, as we will say later on. And fourth, and for the last, we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. So the United Nations is not just to prevent another war, but also to create and to promote social progress and better standards of life for everybody in a larger freedom. And for these ends, these important ends, the United Nations wanted to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, to unite the strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure by the acceptance of principles and institutions that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest of the international community. So this is the preamble, which is very beautiful to read today, because many of these principles are still very important and very pertinent to today's problems of the international community. And afterwards, in article first, and in the first article and the second article, we have the purposes and principles of the organization. The purpose of the United Nations should be, first of all, to maintain international peace and security, and to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace and the suppression of acts of aggression and other breaches of the peace, and to bring, by peaceful means, in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, the peaceful settlement of disputes. Secondly, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination. Third, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems, economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character problems, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And in the last purpose, which is extremely important as well, to be a center. So the United Nations wants to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. So a center. Now we see what the whole humankind seated in the General Assembly, representing all the states, representing all cultures, and they can debate, discuss, and approve recommendations to solve those huge multilateral problems that we have ahead. So, and the principles of the organization are the principles of the sovereign equality of all its members. It's important. All the states, as you know, in the General Assembly are seated one state, one vote, independently of the size or number of population and so forth. So the sovereign equality of all its members. Secondly, second principle, all members shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. The charter is an international treaty and therefore binding for all the states of the international community has signed the charter, as I said before, and therefore they are obliged by the Charter, the 193 states. No? All members shall settle their international dispute by peaceful means, and in paragraph 4, the important principles: all members shall refrain in international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. And the last principle, fifth principle in paragraph 7, is the principle, the famous principle of no intervention in international matters, in internal matters, which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. So this is beautiful to read again, this preamble written 75 years ago, and just and to be inspired by these purposes, principles, and determinations of the people gathered in San Francisco after the Second World War. I would desire that some of the leaders of our world today will read every day these things, no? Just not just to dream, but also to try to put into practice in the international policies today. So, what is one of the questions that we can ask? What is the international order expressed in the Charter? There is no doubt that the international order expressed in the Charter reflects, in general terms, the international liberal order imposed by the victorious powers of the Second World War, and especially by the United States. The United States, as you know very well, 1945 was the great victorious power, the power who had the great strength in the fight against the powers of against Hitler, Mussolini, and Japan, of course. No? So the United States, because helped by Great Britain, with the Great Britain of the President Churchill, the Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and with the acquiescence of the Soviet Union, that time with Stalin, which participated also in the last important conference of Potsdam, and in which the main points of the Charter were decided. No? So, but Stalin was in the minority in this group of the big powers, especially the United States, Great Britain, France, with President de Gaulle, who was in exile in London. But but was the United States was the great power which imposed some of the many things in the Charter. There are two new legal principles of great importance in the Charter. First of all, the prohibition of the use of force in the international relations against territorial integrity, as we have read in Article 2(4). And the second very important principle, the obligation of peaceful settlement of disputes. All the states oblige themselves to resolve their international disputes through peaceful means. So the prohibition of the use of force and the obligation of peaceful settlement of disputes were new legal principles of great importance in the Charter. It was an advancement of the international order. But at the same time, some principles in the Charter were traditional principles in international law, like the principle of sovereign equality of all its member states, and the principle of non-intervention in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. However, as in the International Court of Justice said in 1949, the United Nations Charter has not established an organization with political authority superior to the states. So the United Nations Charter has not established a super state. So the international community remains as a community composed by independent and sovereign states which do not recognize another political authority who can impose upon them international norm without its consent. So, although the United Nations Charter creates some important organs like the General Assembly, the Security Council, the International Courts of Justice, they are not equal to a legislative, executive, or judicial powers in a national state. That's important. So the General Assembly is not a legislative power of the international community. The Security Council is not the executive power of the international community, and the International Court of Justice is not a judicial power of the international community as in a national state we have now. Because in the national states, as you know very well, the legislative power has the power to approve norms, rules, which apply to everyone within the territory of the state. The executive power takes decisions, government, which are compulsory for all the people under the jurisdiction of the state, and the courts, the tribunals, of course, have the power to decide when there is a conflict between people or different organs of the states. These organs have important limitations. The General Assembly, Security Council, and the International Court of Justice to fulfill that role in a national state. But perhaps in the future, if the international community gets, and it would be decided to get more integrated, the General Assembly could have much more power, and the International Court of Justice as well could have more power in that respect as the most important court in the international community, which the power to decide the international conflicts between the states from the legal point of view. So, the principle of the sovereignty of the state is the main principle in this intergovernmental organization. As you know, the United Nations is an international organization. States create the international organizations and give the organization, give them a limited powers, the powers that they wanted to give. So the international organizations can do whatever the states have decided to give them. Of course, in the charter, there are also another new principles and very important principles that in the Conference of San Francisco, the states which were not the superpowers, but pressed to the big powers who decided, for example, the lines of the Security Council and the 5 security members and the way in which the Security Council should act according to Chapter 7 of the Charter. But thanks to the pressure of these other states, in San Francisco were 51 states, thanks to these states, we have now recognized in the Charter as compulsory for all the states, the principle of universal respect and observance for human rights and fundamental freedoms, Articles 56 and 78, without discrimination as to race, sex, language, and religion. Second, the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Third, the principle of international cooperation in order to find solutions of international economic, social, health, and related problems. So the big superpowers in the conference in San Francisco were much more concerned to prevent war and to establish an organization which prohibits the use of force, but they wanted to maintain the status quo and then the powers and they were not so interested in other principles as the other states, middle and small states, that they understood that true peace in the world is not possible if we don't have the respect for human rights and the international cooperation in the economic and social issues. Therefore, another of the big organs, the fifth important organ of the United Nations, is the Council for Economic and Social Affairs, as you know. And fourth, another principle very important, the international legal regime for territories under colonial powers, the famous international trusteeship system in Articles 75 to 91. We should not forget that in 1945, it's amazing, 2/3 of mankind were almost under colonial powers, so were submitted to the colonial power. The independence of India, as you know, was in 48. So India in 1945 was a colony of Great Britain. So the first two countries who get independence were India and Indonesia in 48, and therefore, so many of Africa and Asia countries were under the power of colony. And this system, with the Article 75 to 91, create the Council for Trustees to help these peoples to get not independence, but just to impose to the colonial powers some obligations to treat the people under the colonial powers according to some standards of civilization. So this is quite an interesting point. In spite of all of these, the United Nations Charter tried to create a system of collective security. The collective security as saying, well, we forbid the use of force, we oblige states to peaceful settlement of disputes, and so therefore, if there is the Security Council has the main responsibility to maintain peace and security. So if there is an act of aggression, otherwise one state to another, so the Security Council could approve an international intervention against the state who has broken the law. This article, this important article of Article 2/4 of the United Nations Charter. However, as we know very well, and we will comment later on, this system of collective security in the Charter has also important shortcomings in the practice. It only works if there are unanimity in the great powers and the Security Council, because the 5 big powers, have the right to veto. So if one of the great powers, or the great 5 powers, exercise the right to veto, the Security Council is blocked and cannot approve a binding resolution. And secondly, if the right of self-defense in Article 51, if an armed attack occurs, is not abused when the Security Council is blocked, the right of self-defense has been in the history of the United Nations abused by several states when the Security Council has been blocked. And third, the principle, the apparently very important principle of peaceful settlement of disputes in the Charter should be used in good faith, because as Article 33 of the Charter said, it allows a great freedom of means to get to the settlement of disputes. So states can choose, according to Article 33, as you probably know, the mean who want to resolve an international dispute. The parties to any dispute, says Article 33, the continuation of which is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, shall first of all seek a solution by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agencies or arrangement or other peaceful means of their own choice. So states are not compelled to go to the International Court of Justice, so to get to a judicial or to arbitration. They are not compelled, but they are free to choose what means want to resolve an international dispute, which is when one state is not in good faith, so could say, well, and we are in negotiations, we are in, but the international dispute is not solved. No? So it is desirable also that to make the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice compulsory for all the states of the international community for legal disputes in the future. So the times go, and we are only in the first. Well, it's so interesting. So you have all the year to study international legal studies and international law, and so this is just more. Well, because we have only until 12, no, or more or less, yeah. So some considerations, some brief considerations about the history of the United Nations during these 75 years. So it's because it's very interesting, no? 75 years, so we have the charter, we have the legal text, what they said, but what has happened in history and how the United Nations has read the charter and has implemented the charter in practice. So we can divide these 75 years in 4 main stages or phases, which are extremely important. First of all, the phase, I'm going to talk very briefly, the first phase, the phase of the Cold War from 1947 to 65, the Cold War. The second phase, the phase of decolonization, extremely important. Decolonization, so the access to independence of most of the countries of Africa and Asia, which were submitted to colonial power. The third, very extremely important, this phase could say the 1970 to 1990, because the last state independent in Africa, for example, Namibia, was in 1991. And the third phase, and another extremely important phase, the phase of the new international economic order, or the attempt to the third world countries to get a new international economic order. And the fourth stage, or the fourth phase, was after the failure of the third world countries to make development and the right to development at the center of the work of the organization, especially of the work of the General Assembly and the Economic Council and the institution of Bretton Woods, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the organization of the international commerce. The United Nations after 1985, so they have a new perception of its functions and ends in. So this idea of created a system of collective security for all the states is abandoned to some extent, and the United Nations plays an important role in trying to diminish the impact of international crises, Iran, Iraq, for example, and they see their role also to try to help in the process of peace in several countries in which there were internal conflicts or civil wars, no? El Salvador, Mozambique, Angola, Guatemala, and so forth. So, and this is the famous institution of the operations of the blue helmets on the to create these forces, just to try, just not peace enforcing according to Chapter 7 of the Charter, but peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building in the different phases of the operations for maintaining peace and security in these internal areas. And in this last phase, in the fourth phase, is this great function of the United Nations as an institutional structure of the international community to solve economic and social problems. No? And they were so with the help of the Council of Economic and Social Affairs as well. So, well, just to mention the phases, because we don't have time. It is extremely interesting. You will have time to study all these phases, but perhaps to mention the second phase, the decolonization, because it's an extremely important, the access to independence of the peoples submitted to colonial powers, to make that the organization pass through the number of 50 states in the Conference of San Francisco in 1945, and the number that we have today, the number of 193, representing all cultures, all peoples in the world. And this is a huge evolution and a huge achievement of the international community. So now the international community, through the international organization, is a true universal. So it's not a Western organization like it was to some extent the international order in the 19th century or the 20th century, or even the League of Nations after the First World War. But now we have a true universal organization representing all member states, all peoples of the world, all cultures. So we have, for the first time, not a Western organization or a world ruled only by Western powers, but a multi-polar system, no? Which is extremely important. So, fine, we don't have time to go into the different phases, even though are extremely important. Professor Felipe Gomez wrote his doctoral thesis, extremely interesting, about the right to development, which is extremely important and linked to the peace of the world, and still we don't have advanced much more about the equality of the economic rights of the peoples in the world, as we know. The huge problem nowadays in the international community as well is the gap between North and South, and the inequality and the injustice, the economic injustice in the world. And so therefore we should go much more ahead in that area. So it's still very, very pertinent today. So finally, some reflections about the achievements, and briefly, or when, dear Dean, and then we can open a time of questions. Yeah, so, yeah, 2 minutes. Usually we, the professors, even the old professors, we are so long, a little bit boring, no? As you, so thank God you will have during the course very young professors. And Joanna wrote his thesis on humanitarian intervention as well, extremely interesting question as well, the right of, well, and so what I want to say about that, the achievements. So the codification, just mentioned, the codification and development of international law. The United Nations created the Commission of International Law to help the international community to create, to codify and proceed a progressive development, big and huge areas of international law, like the law of the sea, the law of the international treaties, the law of international responsibility, and so forth. Many, many areas through the work of the Commission, or the International Law Commission, which is a commission of the United Nations. So codification and development of international law. Secondly, the establishment of international norms regarding human rights. As I said before, more than 150 treaty declarations on human rights. This is what is the problem? That many of these declaration treaties and principles are not implemented by the states. So one is the theory, and the other thing is the practice. So still in the world, many violations of human rights, as you know very well. So, and this is one of the great challenges for the future, also for the international system and for the United Nations. So we are now in a very big crisis in the face of the importance of respect and observance of human rights. It is terrible. You, the young people, you are the future, and you should reaffirm the faith of the importance of the fundamental human rights, and to respect the human rights of all of the world, people of the world. And we are in a situation very bad. Advances, another achievement, advances in humanitarian law, the resolution of numerous conflicts, the operations of peacekeeping and reconciliation is another achievement, and a lot of another accomplishment in every area of international activity. And the challenges, I think the challenges, I think there should be, in my opinion, three main lines: democratization of the international community and the United Nations and the reform of the Security Council. Secondly, humanization, so putting the human beings in the center of the system and the human rights law. And third is socialization, democratization, humanization, socialization. So to try to answer to the huge problem of the equality of the countries of the world. So the more than 70% of humankind are in underdeveloped countries. No? The respect for the rule of law is another very important challenge in this moment. The other day, Professor Javier Solana said, the famous former secretary of NATO, said that we shouldn't underestimate the insistent violations of international law, and he mentioned the violation by the United States of the treaty between Iran and the United States to the nuclear weapons, or the violation by Great Britain of the treaty with the European Union. So that's an example that two of the biggest powers of the world just violating international law in an incredible way. And in the case of the United States, even threaten the other states which would comply with international law and with that treaty to take sanctions against those. So it's an extremely difficult moment. No? So, and the Pope, I'm going to end with the Pope Francis in an intervention in the United Nations just 2 weeks ago, said some very interesting things. If someone are interested, I recommend very heavily this speech. He said we have to transform the international order and the United Nations. He believes quite heavily in the role of international law and the role of the United Nations that we have to make stronger. He said this situation nowadays, the pandemic, represents a concrete opportunity for transformation, for rethinking our way of life and our economic and social system, which are widening the gap between rich and poor based on an unjust distribution of resources. We are faced then with a choice between two possible paths. I think the international community has two possible paths now. One path leads to the consolidation of a multilateralism as the expression of a renewed sense of global co-responsibility, a solidarity grounded in justice and in justice and the attainment of peace and unity with the human family. The other path emphasizes for the states self-sufficiency, nationalism, protectionism, individualism, and isolation. And this second path excludes the poor, the vulnerable, and those dwelling on the peripheries of life. That path will certainly be detrimental to the whole community, causing self-inflicted wounds on everyone. It must not prevail. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for your words. A real lesson of public international law. Thank you also for making shorter. There is a very interesting issue, and all of you will have time during the program to deep in this issue. I don't know if anyone wants to say something. Any comment? Any question?
The concrete proposals for reforming the Charter and the United Nations are huge, and there is a lot of studies, and we can see during this year studying. So the reform of the Security Council, of the General Assembly, I didn't want to enter into those because it's a huge and very concrete proposals, no? But just to point some, but they are, and I think I encourage you to study and to work through the reform and and to make it stronger.
Thank you very much, Jaime. The academic program is very open, and you will have the opportunity to choose different paths of specialization. This is the idea of this LLM. To focus more on this public international law, or well, either to go more for a private international trade focus. It's another approach of international law, of course. So you will have the opportunity to decide under the inspiration and the help, the support of Felipe and Emilio, both directors of this master. So I think that this is now the moment to put an end in this inaugural session, opening session, and start working on the program and to know a bit more about the methodology, to know a bit more about the plan, the curriculum of the program. We were able to launch this new program despite this coronavirus. So the lessons will be face-to-face. You have seen already the room is in the first floor near the Dean office. So we will be closed during this next month. And this is important also for us because the contact, the social networking in a program, in a postgraduate program is especially important. You are 12 students, 11 of you are here, one is via Zoom, so hello. He's in Cameroon, and we hope you can come here as soon as possible. So in the meantime, you will follow the classes via online, via Zoom or via Meet. Okay, but to be few, happy few, as Shakespeare said, is also good. So you will be the first promotion of this LLM, and I really hope that this will be a very successful experience, not only knowledge, but also experience to experience the international law. That's the idea for us. So thank you very much for choosing Deusto, and we will try to make our best for that. Thank you very much.